Hi, welcome to our book review. Today we're going to be reviewing the book Meat Planet, and this is written by Benjamin Alds Wargaft. So first we're going to give an introduction about this book. So the overall big picture of Meat Planet is that it discusses the implications of lab-grown meat, environmentally, ethically, and economically. The author Wargaft discusses the challenges of this type of meat production, but also the many positive outcomes it could create on a global scale. And then we have some major themes of this book. The first one is going to be food identity. Wargaft explains what it means to call something meat when it's grown in a lab, and what humans' first impressions of this are, and if they could really deal with this different type of food identity in the future. And then another major theme is just the ethics of it. So lab-grown meat really challenges the traditional human diet of consuming animals by slaughter. And then another major theme is the uncertainty and limits. So this book really emphasizes that lab-grown meat is still far from the market, and it may never really fully replace conventional meat. And then the overall scope of this book. So Meat Planet combines the use of data from Wargaft's time in cultured meat labs. So he actually spent a lot of his time researching in the labs. And then interviews with a wide range of credible sources, such as scientists and activists, philosophical reflection of the implications of lab-grown meat, as well as the historical context about our food systems.
Okay, the main thesis that we took away from Meat Planet was that throughout Wargaft's exploration into the new and emerging cultural meat industry, he demonstrates that artificial meat would not actually resolve the ethical and environmental problems that the traditional meat processing facilities face now. And he argues that these problems in the industrial agricultural system would actually have to be confronted at both the cultural and political structure levels before any changes would be able to be made, as these structures are what created the problems in the first place. So we would have to address what has happened now before we can move forward with the meat processing and the environmental and social factors that were displayed in the book. Some of the supporting evidence that we found was that the author stresses that evolving cultural meat could become the quote-unquote same problem in a new package, which means that if we don't change the consumption patterns if we don't change consumption patterns as well as how our meat is governed, who benefits? We will see no change in the industry. And throughout the research presented, we can see that innovation optimism brings doubts along at the same time, that the scaling cultured meat will fix the land, labor, animal welfare, and justice issues. Additionally, the author investigates back into the industrial livestock history and the exact cultural meanings of meat in order to properly show that ethical and environmental harms actually stem back to social institutions such as dietary norms and market incentives, not just production techniques. This also supports the idea that agricultural change must be tied to cultural and political changes before any changes can actually be made in the system. In addition, interviews throughout the book, the author argues that these are not just cultural issues, but they're impacted heavily by government's problems as well. In quotes, these are not problems that lab-grown meat alone can solve. And then he continues on to say that governments around the world need to rethink their relationship with technology and regulation. And he continues on from that. This supports the claim that both political and cultural structures need to be addressed and face a change before any progress can be made. So all in all, we would have to address the cultural and political systems now before we can move forward with any kind of change in the industrial agricultural system, and that is displayed throughout the book.
After analyzing Wergath's thesis regarding lab-grown meat and the impact it would have on society, we found that there were many strengths that build his argument up while leaving room for improvement with some weaknesses. One notable strength is the author's strong commitment to scientific integrity. Rather than making bold predictions or overshadowing ongoing research, he approaches the subject with a healthy level of skepticism. This reinforces trust with the readers and also encourages readers to think critically rather than simply accept speculative claims. Another strength is the author's acknowledgement of how complex the situation truly is. One point that Wergath makes that stood out to us is that technological solutions often shift problems rather than fully resolving them. This argument illustrates that the future of lab-grown meat wouldn't completely change the meat industry, but rather sprout new, different problems. This forces the reader to engage more with the topic and allows for more discussion to be made. One final strength, and we think it's the most important, is that this thesis utilizes a large variety of interdisciplinary perspectives. It weaves together insights from anthropology, philosophy, ethics, and more, giving readers a broader understanding of the dilemmas surrounding food systems and technology. This cross-disciplinary approach allows their audience to consider not just scientific, but also cultural and moral dimensions of the topic, showing the author has researched this topic from all perspectives. On the contrary, weakness for this thesis is that the author focuses heavily on Western industrial agriculture. While this context is important, the author does not explore how cultural meat or technological change might affect other food cultures, global economies, or diverse agricultural systems. This narrow focus restricts how universally applicable the arguments are. Another weakness is the lack of concrete conclusions. The author raises many significant ethical and practical questions, which could be helpful for discussion, but ultimately provides little guidance on what the reader should do moving forward. This leaves readers with important issues to think about, but without clear direction or actionable insights. Finally, the book's dense and highly philosophical writing style can make it difficult for general audiences to engage with. The ideas are rich, but the delivery may feel overwhelming for readers who are not already familiar with philosophical discourse.
For our opinions, we overall agree that Meat Planet does an excellent job of combining science, ethics, culture, and history to examine the global meat problem. The book really highlights how complex it is to create meaningful change on a large scale and presents a realistic picture of how meat consumption might evolve over time. The author supports his points with a lot of valuable evidence and thorough research, which offers insight into a more sustainable and humane future for the meat industry. On the other hand, we did find that the book didn't fully address an important topic, which is economic access. We wish it had explored more deeply how these innovations, like lab-grown meat, might be distributed and whether they could help address things like food insecurity. Cultured meat could address both ethical and environmental issues, but it's unclear how inclusive or even widely available this product could be in the real world. And that's a key question for thinking about its real impact. So while the book is excellent for understanding the challenges, the possibilities of the cultured meat industry, it leaves a lot of room for further discussion about the accessibility and equity in the future of food and specifically lab-grown meat.
So that is our book review of Meat Planet by Benjamin Olds Wargaft. Thank you so much for listening.